right, so get ready because today we are diving into a topic that's causing quite a stir.
Definitely.
How about that for a little build-up, huh?
Yeah.
It's all about the role of the monarchy. In today's world,
Yeah.
we've got this piece
Right.
to defend that, which refuses to.
Yeah.
And let me tell you,
Yeah.
the author is not holding back.
No, they are not.
Not one bit.
It's a fascinating piece.
It really is. And they are clearly grappling with some,
Yeah.
deeply held beliefs and assumptions about the crown.
Absolutely. It's an exploration of what it means to be loyal,
Yeah.
what it means to be disillusioned, and how do we support an ideal even when we don't know if the current representation is really doing it for me?
And boy, oh boy, do they have some thoughts about King Charles.
Yeah.
In their view, he's just not living up
Right.
to the essence of British identity, to tradition.
Yeah. And they point to some very specific examples, and one of the key ones is this whole issue of the hereditary peers.
Okay, so hereditary peers, break that down for me. What are we even talking about here? And why does the author see this as such a betrayal?
Okay, so imagine a system where you have the House of Lords, right? And some members of the House of Lords, they got there because they inherited their seats.
They inherited their seat.
They inherited it
Okay.
through their family line, their noble lineage, right?
Gotcha.
It's a way of ensuring a connection to history and tradition within the very heart of government. Now, the author sees King Charles's acceptance of their removal, because this has been an ongoing debate.
Right.
They see his acceptance of that removal as a real break from this historical continuity,
Wow.
a move towards something more modern and, in their view, less authentic.
So by not fighting to preserve this system, it's like he's turning his back on
What?
a core element of what it means to even have a British identity.
Exactly. And I think that's the crux of it, right? They're arguing that a true monarch should be a guardian of tradition, a symbol of national unity, and that by aligning himself with policies that dismantle those traditions, he's going against the very essence of what the monarchy should represent.
And they call this an anti-national monarchy.
Yeah, it's this idea that the crown is actively undermining the nation it's meant to embody.
Which is a wild thought, and it gets even wilder because then they compare King Charles to, wait for it, Pope Francis.
This is a bold comparison, I'll give them that.
There really is.
But it does highlight, I think, a broader point that they're trying to make about leadership in general. They see both of these figures as compromising their traditional roles in the face of all these modern pressures,
Right.
and potentially at the cost of their institution's core values.
It really makes you think, at what point does disagreeing with leadership become something more? When does criticism cross the line into this feeling of betrayal? Especially when you're dealing with figures who carry so much symbolic weight. And the author really does not let up at all on this point. They keep going.
Yeah.
They go on to criticize what they call Tory monarchists,
Right.
which is like a whole other can of worms.
Right.
But the gist I'm getting is they're saying that it's not enough to enjoy the monarchy.
Right. Yeah, you can't just enjoy the ceremonial parts.
Yeah, just be like, oh, look at the pretty hats.
The parades.
That's not enough. There's a responsibility here.
Exactly. There's an actual responsibility.
And they call it being a royal people,
Yes.
which I kind of love.
It's a good phrase.
It is a good phrase. And it's this idea that it's the duty to actually uphold the values, to really
Yeah.
live the spirit of what this whole institution is supposed to be about.
It's about action. It's not just about showing up, you know?
Right. It's not just about waving a flag on Coronation Day. And then, like you said, just going back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Exactly.
And this is where they bring in King Arthur,
Yeah.
which I thought was so fascinating.
The analogy is great.
It really is. So they're like, okay, imagine if Excalibur just reappeared today.
Right.
Would we as a society even be worthy of wielding it?
That's the question, isn't it?
I know. And it made me think, are we talking about being worthy as individuals?
Right, because it makes you kind of look in the mirror.
Right. Are we talking about a collective kind of sense of duty, as a society, are we worthy?
Or is it something even more than that?
Right. What does that even mean? And so they're getting at this idea that a true monarch needs a royal people
Absolutely.
to support them, right? Like a populace that shares those values and is actually willing to go to bat for them.
Yes, and that's what makes it a monarchy and not just like a dictatorship or something.
Yes, exactly. It has to be reciprocal.
Right.
And so it really makes you think okay, what would it take for us to live up to that?
Yeah, what would it take?
What kind of social transformation are we talking about here?
It's a great question.
And then Just when I thought we were like reaching the peak weirdness, the author throws in this whole other thing about ultra loyalty.
Yeah.
Which I gotta say, at first I was like, what?
It's a curveball for sure.
It really is. And the word ultra itself just has so much baggage these days, you know?
It does.
So the more I sat with it, I realized like, okay, they're using it in a very specific way here.
Right. It's not about blind obedience. It's not about what we typically associate with that word.
Exactly. So what are we talking about then?
It's about a deeper kind of devotion, one that's active, it's engaged, it's definitely not uncritical.
Okay, so not just blindly following tradition or ignoring the flaws.
Not at all. It's about loving something enough to hold it to a higher standard, you know,
To expect more.
to actually demand better, even if it means being willing to challenge it. Okay. I see, that's interesting. And they even go so far as to say to be truly ultra is to die for what you hate. Which, when I tell you, I had to reread that line like 5 times.
It's a powerful statement, no doubt about it.
It really is. How do you even wrap your head around that? Dying for something you hate. How is that loyalty?
It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving act,
Yeah.
the most loyal act,
Mhm.
is to refuse to let something we cherish be corrupted or become stagnant.
Okay.
So it's like, think about founders throughout history who challenged the very institutions they were deeply devoted to.
Right.
Someone like Martin Luther, right,
Right.
criticizing the Catholic Church.
Right.
Not because he hated it, but because he believed so strongly that it had strayed from its true purpose.
So it's like this really intense form of tough love almost.
You could say that.
Like, I'm doing this because I care. Yeah, I have to push for reform, even if it means risking rejection.
Wow. And that takes us right back to that idea of the royal people.
It does, doesn't it?
It's not enough to just be a bystander. You have to be active. You have to be willing to get in there and fight for what you believe in, even when it's hard.
And the author leaves us with this striking image of fighting for every inch, even in the face of defeat.
Which is such a powerful way to end it.
It really is. It's about never giving up on those ideals, even when the people or the institutions that are supposed to represent them let us down.
It's like that saying, you know, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. It's a
Exactly.
constant struggle.
It is.
So after all of this, where do we even land? I mean, the core question here seems to be, is true loyalty about blind obedience, or is it about holding the things we love accountable?
And that's a question for the ages, isn't it? It's something we all have to grapple with in our own lives.
It really is. And in a world where it feels like institutions are constantly failing to live up to their promises, that question feels more relevant than ever.
It really does.
It's not just about the monarchy either. It's about all the different ways we choose to engage with the world around us.
Absolutely.
So what about you? What are you taking away from this conversation?
Oh, so much. It's given me a lot to think about for sure.
Me too.
Yeah.
And hopefully it sparked some new ideas for you listening as well. Maybe even some questions of your own to explore, because that's what this is all about, right?
It's about digging deeper and not being afraid to ask the hard questions.
Exactly. So until next time, keep those questions coming and keep on diving.